rhythmic. This would, basically look like a very steep peak in just a few seconds to up to a minute or so, and then this long flat tail that kind of goes out there. You'll notice too that there's he looked at all sorts of different types of power extraction from people. And back then there was some notion, well, maybe rowing would be better than cycling, or cycling with your arms, or whatever, and basically showed that it didn't really matter too much whether you were cycling and turning hand cranks, or you were running, or you were rowing, that there was not a substantial difference between all those different types of ways of extracting power out of a human. He also tested some top athletes, and so any of the symbols on here that have circles on them show the performance of a championship athlete in different sorts of disciplines and stuff like that. To put a scale on it, in my case, when I was at Peak Fitness for the Kremer Albatross, which is kind of a follow-on aircraft in 1979 that we flew across the channel, I could put out about 255 watts, which is about 0.34 horsepower for about 2 hours. Now, one thing I specified here, I also said, and I weighed 137 pounds. Now, that's one thing that isn't shown on Wilkie's chart, is that he's not showing the power output per pound, but he's just saying, how much power does a particular athlete put out. For human-powered flight, for a variety of reasons, it's the peak power is not nearly as important as how much power you can put out per unit of weight. So just looking at humans as an engine, these and a couple of other charts are just ones I grabbed off a website. And this is just a generalized kind of torque curve of a human. So you can put out basically as much torque at practically 0 RPM as you can at 100 RPM. And so your actual torque curve as an engine looks pretty flat, very similar to things like steam engines. And then as you get to higher RPMs, 150 or 200 RPM, then that torque starts to minimize, just because all of you know that if you try to pedal really, really fast, you get to the point where you're hardly even being able to press on the pedals. So humans have this very flat power curve, and they're pretty heavy as well. If you then map out what that actual power looks like, it's this fairly non-peaky, fairly low slope sort of curve that over a short period of time you'd have your max power around 150 RPM or so. This example really is for peak power. This isn't really for some sort of sustainable thing. But for sustainable power, you can basically just move the curve down and say that your maximum sustainable power would be somewhere in the region of like 80 to 120 RPM, somewhere in that region. Now, if you look at what non-biological engines can do, so here I am at my peak of fitness. I could put out 0.34 horsepower for 2 hours. A little model airplane engine can put out in the range of, let's see, like 60% more power than that, and only weigh, say, just a pound. So the power to weight ratio of little engines, either electric or gas engines, versus what a human can do, there's just no comparison. And so then the question would be, well, if you want to fly, why wouldn't you just fly with an engine rather than trying to fly with pedal power? Why would you want to do that? To put some other curves on things, the kind of power required curve of a bicycle, and again, these are ones that I just kind of stole off a website that had some fairly simple sort of diagrams, and these are just very generalized sort of thing. But the power required on a bicycle is this fairly smoothly increasing curve, and it's dominated by air drag. And so for a mountain bike to say go 20 miles an hour, you might take in the region of 0.2 to 0.25 horsepower. As you go faster, then because the air drag goes up as the cube of your speed, you're going to get to the point where going just a little bit faster takes a whole lot more power. And so all bicycles, whether a really draggy mountain bike or a track bike or even a streamlined bicycle, all have this same sort of looking power curve where as you go slow, it doesn't take much power. As you go a little faster, it takes a little more. And so you can kind of, depending on what your power capability is, you can kind of trim yourself to fit, and basically you can go as fast as you have power for. Airplanes, unfortunately, are different. So the power required curve for an airplane, and this is out of an actual NASA study that was done in the early 80s on one of our backup Gossamer airplanes. The power curve and the drag curve is basically the same. Maybe the drag curve illustrates a little better. Is such that you have an optimum speed to fly where you're going to have minimal power. If you go a little faster than that, your power goes up a bit. If you go a little slower than that, your power goes up quite a large amount. And this is kind of a runaway sort of thing too, in that if you're human powering an airplane, you fly just a little too slow, the power required goes up, the drag goes up, which slows the plane down because you've got not much inertial mass in terms of forward speed. Very quickly, within a couple seconds, the drag is just going right off the top of the scale. You can't pedal hard enough, and you're plummeting towards the ground. So to ride a bicycle and fly an airplane are a completely different paradigm in terms of bicycle, you just kind of go as fast or slow as you want to. An airplane, you don't have that luxury. You have kind of a minimum required amount of power. And if you don't meet that, you're not going to be able to fly at all. Now, because of that Wilkie curve, you can put out, any human can put out this large amount of power for a short period of time. So basically what all this says is that any person can fly a human-powered airplane, a well-designed one, for a short period of time. The real trick is being able to fly it for a long time. So in summary, bikes, if you go slower, takes less power. The control system is not particularly complicated. You've got, in effect, kind of one-axis control. You've got to worry about what direction you go. Where with an airplane, you actually have 3 axes of control that you're having to maneuver all of those in real time. Also, with the Gossamer aircraft, and with any aircraft that you're trying to get maximum performance out of, you typically make it unstable, which is to say that if you take your hands off the controls, it deviates. It either slows down or speeds up, or it does not have a nice trim speed where you can just take your hands off and fly. So you're having to constantly fly the plane and make little tiny corrections in terms of the speed. Also, because of the fact that having a really lightweight airplane is important, the planes are always kind of on the verge of breaking. So to put it in a bicycle analogy, it'd be flying a human-powered airplane in a way would be like if you had this bicycle, that if you went a little too fast, the wheels fell off. And if you went a little too slow, suddenly the brakes jammed on and brought you to a stop. So you have this delicate kind of balancing act that you have to go through. And now I'm going to show a couple of clips here of a DVD. I'm going to show it was made from leftover. And
This is for winning a fight sprint. A man-powered plane must take off by itself. It must reach a height of 10 feet at the beginning of the course.
so this was
It
for
must
the
make a
original
complete
Kremer
left
prize. It's
turn
been up since 1959.
and a right turn. It must clear the same 10-foot height again at the end.
Half a mile between the 2 points.
Only up to here.
Official observers lay out the half-mile distance
48.
between the 2 markers.
By my. Yeah.
And this is
Greg,
the
anytime you want to go,
original
everyone's
Gossamer
ready,
Condor,
and
which was out in
the
Mojave
wind looks
in
crooked,
1976.
but it's awfully weak, so I think it may be
A
okay.
T-bar to measure the 10-foot start and finish is made from leftover Gossamer Condor parts.
And this is Greg Miller, who was a very active amateur cyclist, who was the initial pilot. You notice there's no covering on the fuselage, and the wing is just a single surface, right over
Taking off.
The plane makes it over the 10-foot mark with just inches to spare on this go.
It's flying into a little bit of a headwind here, which you'll notice that the
Constantly
plane is
changing
very
winds
slow.
defeat their effort.
Yeah, it's okay. General performance just goes smooth with this much wind in comparison to before.
And just
The Gossamer
giving you
Condor is
visual
still
perspective,
operating on the
wingspan
very
here is
margins
about
of
95
flight.
feet.
It
So
lacks
this thing
precision.
is-
It lacks control.
It's big. Not so nice necessarily.
Why did you fly over the concrete?
That's where the
Well,
post is.
one thing you'll notice is that it has these little teeny wheels on it. So
It's time to try the Kremer course again.
now this is now several months later up in Shafter, California. Greg still is flying here. And this is kind of the second iteration of the Gossamer Condor. So you can see that the fuselage has been covered in. It now flies faster, has a double surface wing, several detail improvements. Main
Greg
improvement
clears the
of
10-foot starting
controllability hadn't
pole
yet
with
been
3 feet to
achieved, though.
spare.
For all you pilots, you can see he's already crashed. He's in big trouble. But human powered airplanes fly slow, so it takes a while
Stop pedaling!
for the inevitable to
Stop
happen.
pedaling! Pull left!
He basically didn't do anything wrong other than the fact that since Greg was not a trained pilot, he was kind of learning as he went. And so the plane there, if you actually look at it and kind of watch the film, it's starting to deviate off almost immediately. It's showing a pretty strong right turning tendency, but he's getting instruction literally from a megaphone from Dr. McCready on the ground who's saying, oh, turn left, turn right. And so he's kind of, just kind of, oh, okay, and then it starts to drift off and people are going, oh no, the plane's, you start to hear Dr. McCready even before the pilot is going, oh, hey, maybe that sounds wrong. That was one of the actual limitations. Now, Greg's history, he actually finally decided, oh, this is never going to work, and he got an offer to race in Belgium that summer as an amateur cyclist on a supported team. And he said, fine, I'm gone. And so they looked around for another pilot. Oh my gosh, where are we going to find a pilot? And my roommate was the guy who had chosen the Shafter area as a meteorologically good place to fly, and suggested to Dr. McCready, hey, my roommate just quit his job at the lumber yard, and he's a hang glider pilot, and he's a bike racer. Why don't you try him?
Dawn, August 23rd, 1977.
And so from April of '77 or so, then I became the chief pilot. And then this is actually
And McCready, as
film of
usual,
the
is making
current
changes
price
right up
flight
to the
on
last
23rd
minute.
of August.
He cuts an air vent to cool the pilot's legs. At 7:30 a.m., the breeze
I'll talk about
stills.
that in a bit.
So this is you flying here.
Yeah.
What did you go through your head or what?
Well, this is
After a year of
after
painful
several
evolution,
hundred
it is now
little
a
flights that we had
sophisticated
actually been
aircraft,
building up.
generations
5-minute
removed
flights,
from the
6-minute
simple
flights, and
structure
7-minute
they
flights.
once
So
thought
I
would easily
flew the
win
plane
the
a whole lot.
prize.
And at this point, it was just, like, well, the day before, I hadn't quite achieved the course.
The
I got
Gossamer
all the way
Condor
around, but hadn't
swings
got
its
over the
huge wing
final
around the first
10-foot barrier.
turn with ease.
So we were just attempting to do it one more time and do it right this time. Yeah, there's a tube blowing some air in your face. And the ventilation on the Gossamer Condor was kind of an afterthought since the flight was only going to be 7 or 8 minutes. One thing I noticed on this particular day is right about here, I actually got a little bump of lift, and that probably allowed me to complete the heading. So then all the way down to the other end of the airfield, turn around, come back.
6 minutes and 2 turns later, the only obstacle left is the 10-foot wing.
Lower it a little bit.
Yeah, at that point I'm just, full power, just trying to keep the plane going straight. Navigation was really good at that point.
Man-powered flight has become a reality.
McCready here, this is Vern Oldershaw, who was kind of the chief
After
builder of
thousands
the
of
plane
years
as
of
far as all
man
the structures
pursuing
and
the
stuff
goal
like
of
that.
man-powered flight,
And it was a group of a whole bunch of people,
the
some not
customer
getting paid, some
had
getting paid a
fulfilled
small amount, like I was getting $3 an hour.
The
Stuff like
Condor
that,
is now
but a group
hanging
of
in the
about 20,
Smithsonian
25 people.
Institution's National Air and Space Museum, next to the Apollo 11 moon capsule and the Wright brothers.
Did you have another job at the same time or not?
I did not. No, that was actually my full-time job at the time.
Where can we
So-
get that video?
That is, it's called The Flight of the Gossamer Condor. It is available, I think if you just do a Google search on it, you'll find, it's Ben Shed was the guy, Shed Productions. So it's shedproductions.com, S-H-E-D-D, Productions. And this is kind of the 30th anniversary remix. This half-hour long video actually won the Academy Award for Best Short Subject in 1978. So it was a real story on the part of the guy who did this too, because he believed McCready, who said, oh yeah, this will just take 6 weeks. So he had enough budget to do for a few months. He actually completely ran out of money, and the final shots that you see of the actual prize-winning flight are taken by somebody else, because he had so much run out of money that he could not afford to buy film. So it was pretty bad. Now, with the winning of the Kremer Prize in 1977, then there was almost immediately another prize put up, or at least announced. The rules weren't finalized for a year, for flying from England to France. And the guy who had promoted these was Henry Kremer, who was an English industrialist who just happened to be interested in this whole kind of notion of human-powered flight and exercise physiology and stuff like that. So the prize was announced basically a few months after we won the initial Kremer Figure 8 prize. The rules were finalized in 1978. We were already underway for building an airplane because we knew that with the Gossamer Condor, since it's kind of a just kind of throw it together sort of contraption, we knew that we could just upgrade the structures, use carbon fiber instead of aluminum, pay much more attention to aerodynamic cleanness and something like that. And again, because of that Wilkie curve, if you can fly for 7 minutes, it doesn't take that much more power to fly for 2 or 3 hours. And you probably see that in your own bicycling experience. If you go out and you ride at a good hard rate for 10 minutes, if you cut back just a little tiny bit, you could ride at that rate for a century. For 100 miles, say. So not for a century in terms of time. So anyway, this Kremer Cross-Channel Prize was announced, 100,000 pounds, or about $200,000, and we said, okay, let's go, let's do it. Much more involved in terms of all the logistics. You can't just do it on a California airfield. You have to.
Tap it.
You have to. You have to go to England, so you got the logistics of shipping the planes there. You've got just the English weather is not nearly as predictable as California weather and stuff like that, and so that basically meant we're going to have some sort of much bigger organization, and part of that would be we're going to have some sort of a sponsor to be able to fund kind of all the upfront costs. So this next video here shows just a. Next video is just, I'm showing just a short clip from an hour-long film that's been shown on PBS a bunch of times.
Gossamer Albatross.
There is some.
Built entirely of synthetic, sheathed in a mylar skin, less than 1,000th
So
of
this
an
is
inch
down
thick.
at Terminal
It
Island
is,
in Long
despite
Beach.
its
There was actually an old
96-foot
seaplane
wingspread, the
hangar down
lightest
there,
full-scale
since been torn down,
plane in history.
where we did
A
some
mere
of the test
55
flights and stuff.
pounds.
The planes are built in Hermosa
It is
Beach.
also the slowest. Powered by pedals geared to the propeller, it cruises at 11 miles per hour.
It's covered with this
it,
thin
the
mylar
team hopes
material,
to
which is
win
the
the
same substrate as you have like on a
100,000-pound
videotape
offered by
or
British industrialist
cassette
Henry
tape.
Kremer for the
But
first
obviously without the
man-powered
magnetic coating
cross-channel
and
flight.
thinner,
Ladies and gentlemen, in just a few
nice
months,
stiff material.
on a nice, relatively windless day, we expect this Gossamer Albatross aircraft that you see right behind me.
Again, about a
to
96-foot
fly
wingspan, so,
from
and
the coast
at that point
of
about
England
55
to
pounds.
France, powered solely by the muscles of the pilot, Bryan Allen.
Well, we did do our parties in the 70s.
Seems only one and a
Now,
half
what was my background? I was an amateur cyclist and got up to
soaring
Cat
above
3.
the San Joaquin
I
Valley.
was pretty good at hill climbs, but really my primary sport was hang
Bryan
gliding.
began amateur
And this
bicycle
is flying
racing
at a
while still
hill
in college.
just to
Soon
the
took
east
up
of
hang
Bakersfield.
gliding, a
Based
sport
on
in
hang
which
gliding?
McCready himself pioneered.
No, not because
Thus,
of lack of
when the
interest,
Gossamer
but just
project
hang gliding
demanded
takes
a
a
more
lot of time,
powerful human
and it certainly
engine
takes a
than
certain amount of money
McCready's
to do.
teenage sons
So,
provided.
other things
Bryan
like
Allen's
house and dog
pedaling
and
and
wife,
hang gliding
daughter,
experience
stuff like that.
made him a perfect candidate.
Yeah.
But much must be done before McCready can make good his boast and cross the channel. Seeking more
So this is,
airspace, he
again,
moves
up in
his craft
Shafter,
to Shafter, a
and
farming community not
one of
far
the
from
requirements for
Bryan's
this airplane
hometown.
was that it had to be able
There,
to
at
be
a
taken
small
apart,
airfield used mainly by
shipped,
crop
and
dusters.
reassembled and stuff like
The
that. Gossamer
Albatross
Condor
is
was really one
reassembled for
piece.
test flights during
With the
March
Gossamer
and early
Albatross,
April.
this plane, the main wing was in 4 pieces, and with a group of 6 people or so, you could assemble it in 45 minutes to an hour.
You're involved with the build also?
Yeah, I did actually quite a lot of the construction stuff.
Under the watchful eye of Sam
There were
Duran,
much more
flight
talented
director.
model builders than me, so
Bryan at
the
last
real detail
mounts
work
the
was done by
seat
other
in a
people.
narrow
But there's
mylar
always, kind of a drill
which
holes in
forms
this.
the fuselage.
Gee, this needs to be,
It's
laid out or
fastened in
whatever.
by one of the two
And I did a lot
backup
of that.
pilots.
Also, the
David
layout of the
Sachs.
control system and stuff, I was kind of the prime person that did all that sort of stuff.
Why did it change from recumbent to upright?
That's a great question. The Gossamer Condor had a recumbent style pedaling system.
But normally the plane can be flown.
Where the Gossamer Albatross had an upright position. The Condor started off with no covering on the fuselage, and so to cut down the drag of the pilot, used a recumbent position. When the plane evolved and it was like, oh, it's going to have to go faster, then we still used the same fuselage. So we still had this recumbent position, even though the upright position is actually very slightly better. You're just talking maybe 2 or 3%. And the main thing is that if you can be completely stock upright, your diaphragm is minimally restricted. Now, on a recumbent bicycle, obviously you're bent a bit, but also on a regular upright bicycle, you're also bent over. So what we were doing was we were trying to optimize everything down to the nth degree. And for structural reasons, this fuselage needed to be that deep. It needed to be about 10 feet because there's a whole web of wires that come from the bottom.
That's why it's so tall.
And so it was just one of those situations where you have to have this deep a fuselage for structural reasons, and the pilot will put out the most power if they're literally standing upright. And so that was all part of the kind of optimization process.
And is there a CG location? Is that, I mean, you're the big mass in the whole thing, it seemed like.
Yeah, that turns out to not be that
A big
important.
driver.
I mean, you can overcome things like that just with small amounts of dihedral. You know, so say if you had the pilot real close to where the wing is, you could just put a little teeny bit more dihedral and still have stability. So that really wasn't really an issue. Now the main thing that was going on with the planes was making them as light as possible and as efficient as reasonable, given the fact that we wanted to do this quickly and win a prize and stuff like that. Now this, I won't have the sound up on very much of this because unless you understand Japanese, you're not going to understand the narration here. But this is now, we've actually gone over to England. And so this is the glamorous life of the human-powered pilot, is riding a pedal ergometer. Oh boy, and do that for 2 or 3 hours a day. And make a big nasty sweat stain on the floor and just, you know, there you are. The plane itself can basically, because of its fragileness and its extreme sensitivity to winds, can basically only be flown just in real early morning. So flying, you might have one good day every week or something like that in England. We take the plane out and fly it for 10 minutes, but the rest of the time people were either doing maintenance on the plane or whatever. But in any case, I was having to do lots of training to keep myself in shape.
But you got lots of aerobic training, but not so much flying training.
Yeah, really to keep myself crisp flying wise, really hang gliding was the thing that I did. Now, once we got over to England, then the sponsor decided we don't want the pilot endangered by flying hang gliders, so they actually forbade me from flying, which was really just because some of the other guys on the team were also hang glider pilots, and they'd come back and say, "Oh wow,
we had a great day."
Instead, I was out, you know, pounding the roads or pounding the ergometer or whatever. So this is actually on the morning of June the 11th, where we took the what was now the number 1 of 3 airplanes. We had this was the plane that we'd done kind of all the test flying on, all the development work on, and all the crashes on. So it had been crashed 5 or 6 times, mostly because, well, pretty much everyone except for one of the backup pilots when he stalled the plane. All the crashes were because of some mechanical failure. Something broke in the control system, or a wing just snapped because something was weak. And so this particular plane had accumulated lots of repairs, which meant it was a bit heavier. But since we'd never done an overwater flight before, we decided let's use the number 1 airplane because we have the most experience with it, and it's the most expendable plane too. And so we had 3 airplanes. We also had 3 pilots. I was the chief pilot, but there were 2 backup pilots who were also doing training and stuff.
So you were the expendable pilot for this.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, that was a little hard to work out there. This is actually the second takeoff. The first one, the plane veered off a little runway and broke the front wheel, and we had to replace the wheel, and that slowed us down a bit.
Were there any serious competitors for either of the prizes?
In the case of the Gossamer Condor, yes, there was. There was actually a team in Japan that had a really beautiful plane called the Stork, and they could have won the prize, except they didn't have an airfield that was wide enough. It was long enough, but it wasn't wide enough to be able to actually do a turn on it. So they would fly to the end of the airfield and then turn the plane around and fly it back. They could do that, but they just did not have the physical area there. Plus, it was a university program, and so they were like, "Oh yeah, this is fun," and let fly the plane, and all the students went away. You know, and then the next year, all the students went away. So they weren't all that serious about trying to win the prize. In the case of the cross-channel flight, we were so far ahead already that there weren't any serious competitors for the cross-channel flight, just because we had such a big head start on everything. But had that prize been up for 3 or 4 years, then I think there would have probably been serious competitors.
And when did Kremer establish the initial prize?
The initial prize was either 58 or 59.
And so it just sat there. I mean, that was early.
Well, there were actually lots of people that competed for that initial prize, and built airplanes and crashed and did this and that and the other thing over the years. And it was initially only open to English citizens, and then it was internationalized and opened up. But yeah, basically it was almost 20 years before the prize was won. And that was the expectation with the cross-channel prize on the point of the Royal Aeronautical Society was, well, we'll put up this thing, it's 20 times as far, it's going to take another couple of decades to win. But I think they hadn't paid enough attention to the Wilkie curve. It says if you can fly for 8 minutes, you can just extract a little more efficiency, you can now fly for hours.
Did you stay within ground effect for the whole flight?
That's beneficial. Here's actually one of the nicer days where you actually get to go out and ride your bike. The problem with riding your bike is that at least at that time, this was the 70s, there wasn't any good instrumentation in terms of being able to know how much power did you put out that day. But riding a pedal ergometer, you can actually measure how much did I weigh today, how much water did I lose, what was the temperature, what was the power I put out for how long, and you could actually keep a chart. Where riding on the road is much more subjective, like, oh, I feel great today. But are you great? Maybe not. Maybe you just feel good. And somebody asked about ground effect. Yeah, you notice in a lot of the shots here, the plane's real low to the water. There's an advantage that some seabirds extract in flying close to surfaces, and it actually cuts down the kind of induced drag or the kind of swirls of turbulence at the wingtips. The difficulty with that on this particular flight, at least, was that there was a bit of wave action, and as we got further out in the channel, there got to be more and more waves. And it turns out that the air is very interlinked with the waves, but not precisely in phase. And so it had the effect of being this very smooth but constant turbulence up and down. So the flight got basically out past the midpoint, and I couldn't go any further. And we had prearranged stuff that I would give a signal and just do a little burst of power, climb up to 15 or 20 feet, a boat would come underneath, hook on a tow line, and then at that point we'd figure out, okay, let's see, do I land it on the boats, or how do we take it back over to the launch site, or do we pull it ahead to the landing site, or what do we do, and how do we disassemble it? When I climbed up on that particular day, I climbed out of that real bumpy stuff close to the water and found that it was actually less power required up higher. Now, we had done flights in California over dry lake beds and very much established that, yeah, if you're flying 4 feet above the ground, it definitely takes less power than if you're flying 25 feet up. So we had pretty much quantified how much power was needed at different altitudes, knew that 4 feet was like the optimum altitude. That gave you a little bit of wiggle room for maneuvering, but gave you the most efficiency.
So that was a surprise to you that you discovered by the seat of your pants that day?
Yes. Yeah, like I said before, we had never flown over water, so didn't have the experience. How much interlinking is there going to be? How important is the wave action going to be if there is any wave action? Had no idea.
So does that have an ergometer on
the plane has very minimal instrumentation. It has a little, and somebody was asking about predecessors. Some of them were not serious, like this one, but some of them were actually serious too. The plane's instrumentation, there were these old Polaroid cameras that had a little echolocator, that had a little gold thing on the front. They developed that as an acoustic altimeter for us. So we had this altimeter that went from like 0 to 30 feet and would tell you very precisely, within inches, how high are you instantaneously. Maybe a little too heavy.
Whoa.
This one may be a little too fragile.
Oof.
Having, and then there was a small airspeed indicator that was driven by a little pinwheel that was up on one of the booms in the front. This is a British airplane called the Puffin that was built in the 60s. You can see very complicated, lots and lots of little balsa wood sticks. This is another one called the Jupiter. Now again, for pilots will say, oh dude, that guy's crashing. He's crashing. Look at that. Oh, it's a pilot-induced oscillation. Look at that. But for most people just sitting there looking at it, you go, well, that looks nice. Well, that looks fine. But the thing to notice is that the nose of the airplane is kind of deviating up and down. And it's actually, every time it deviates a little bit more. A little bit more. So the pilot's in there pedaling away. oh, gee, the nose is going down. Oops, now it's starting to kind of crab off to the side. Oops, it's kind of going up. And let's get, oh, what am I doing here? Oh my gosh, you know. Oh boy, I just saved it. Okay, great. Oh, crap. And so that was the unfortunate story with a lot of human-powered airplanes, was that people didn't really understand how to control them, and if they crashed, it did thousands of hours worth of damage. And so the key feature with Gossamer, Condor, and Albatross was that they were very simple structures, wire braces, not obvious, but there's a whole ton of wires, very thin little piano wires, that are coming from the bottom of the fuselage here and up from this stick up on the top, and from the sticks out in the front and the back, to brace the whole thing.
The Albatross's canard is rolling all over the place. Did that cause any effect?
Yes, and in fact,
このエンジンが出すエネルギーの 80% もが
that's a
熱に
primary
なってしま
control
います
system. That both
そ
on
の
the
熱
Condor
を
and the
汗が
Albatross,
乾く
the
時の気化
canard
熱と
was
して逃
tilted
が
from
してや
side
ら
to
なけれ
side,
ば
a
なり
little
ません そう
turbo
すること
tab.
でこの
That
エン
was
ジン
for
がオ
kind
ーバ
of
ーヒートし
fine
ないように冷
directional
やすの
control.
です
And then you had wing warping that was for bigger turns.
も
So
し
you were
汗
using a
が乾かない
combination of
と
twisting the wings
体温が
and
高ま
tilting
り
the
脳
canards
の
for
視
your
床下部
directional
の発汗
control.
を中止させやがて気絶つまりエンストが起きます
Single gear,
Very
no.
shortly after that, he would fail. The more he sweat,
The
汗
guy
を
here
か
is
く
Joe
だけかい
Masterfile.
て
He
こ
was
れが
an
乾くなら
exercise
アレン君の
physiologist
銅板
and
声
a
も楽
professor
なもの
at
になる
Cal
はずで
State
す
Long Beach.
finish the flight.
Again, the glamorous work of being a human powered pilot. Oh, great. Japanese crews show up, they take pictures of you sweating.
When you were crossing the channel, was there like a pilot boat out in front that did?
For the cross-channel flight, yeah, we had, let's see, 4 Zodiac boats, which were kind of to be there to pull the pilot out of the water, and also to keep other boats away, like media boats and stuff. There were about 30 or so media boats that followed us across. And then we had a great big cabin cruiser, a 50-foot cabin cruiser that had all the DuPont officials and the medical doctor and the resuscitation equipment, stuff like that. Yeah, good stuff. And then out in front of the whole armada was the navigation boat that had Dr. McCready in it, and they were doing all the navigating. So my job was just basically keep that boat ahead of me, follow the boat. Now, of course,
First balloon went up,
it
and
wasn't necessarily.
somebody asked another person, "What good is it?" And the answer was, "What good is a newborn baby? You have to wait till it grows up to find out." I think we're still finding out.
So a lot of people ask, well, what good are these crazy things?
In 1980, McCready sets his sights on a new aviation frontier.
And it all kind of developed.
Using solar cells, he creates the world's first piloted plane powered by the sun.
One of the backup planes. It was the number 3 plane. It's a 75% size plane.
1 year later,
So it has a
he
shorter
goes
wingspan.
further. He covers a plane with 16,000 solar cells.
And then this was a plane that was
They
developed
fuel the
actually
first
flying,
ever sun-powered flight across the English Channel. The plane flies beautifully,
really strong.
and the higher it goes, the better it flies.
Parachute.
McCready discovers a new goal. He thinks a solar-powered plane can go higher than any traditional airplane.
So the pilots for this only weighed like 100 pounds. Because
He
again,
comes up with a
compared to
radical
the
new
whole
design.
thing,
A remote-controlled, solar-powered flying wing.
So in terms of development, this is what all
And in 1997, it flies to an astounding 80,000 feet, a world's record for a propeller plane.
I call that 80,000 feet. Congratulations, everybody. Fine job.
So this particular one went to 80,000 feet. They built a follow-on airplane that flew to just short of 100,000 feet. So that's kind of getting up there. Now the questions too are, well, has anybody done anything actually with human-powered flight after the cross-channel flight? And the answer is yes, they have. Now, there's a group from MIT, they built a plane called the Davis, and they flew 70 miles. They're still the world record holder. But in Japan, there's this amazing event that they have every year, sponsored by a particular Japanese video company, where they build 15 or 20 human-powered airplanes, and they also have hundreds of people just run off the pier and fly hang gliders off and stuff. But they have a special class just for human-powered airplanes. And they've been building these. This is, I think, 1985, and so they've been doing this since the mid-80s. So what does that look like? Wow, that's kind of like a Gossamer Albatross. How about that? In later years, their planes started to look more like the nameless airplane. And then there's certain detail differences that I can spot, but still, that's really a dead ringer for the Gossamer Albatross.
Was that an advancement over the Albatross?
Yes, it was.
In what ways?
The primary advancement was that our planes cost about, counting wages and stuff like that, about $50,000 a piece to build, and theirs cost $1 million. And boy, if you spend $1 million, you can build a really, really, really nice.
What did they do differently though?
Differently, they did more advanced structures. Let's see, how do I do this? They did more advanced structures, and as far as the layout of the plane itself, I've got a picture actually that I'll show in a second here. The layout of the plane itself, instead of a 96-foot wingspan, I had a 115-foot wingspan, and instead of having some 40 or 50 bracing wires, it had like 2. So aerodynamically much cleaner, bigger wingspan, still about the same weight, 70 to 80 pounds. Just really make the thing super efficient. And as a result, they were able to fly for 70 some odd miles.
By human power?
By human power, yeah.
Where did they fly from and to?
They flew from the island of Crete to the island of Santorini.
Oh,
Okay, now what has this got to do with human powered flight?
And the dreams that you carry.
One of the things that we did, a couple of us did, a few years afterwards, was we built a human powered blimp. This is actually a model of the blimp, because he had this notion, you could fly in auditoriums. And even with this 3,000 person auditorium in San Jose, it's still not big enough to fly inside. We did indeed build the full-scale, full-size, pedal-powered blimp. And the cool thing about a blimp is it is a flying bicycle. You can slow down, and it takes less power. If you fly at a higher RPM rate, it takes more power. It's exactly like a bicycle in that power sensitive way. It's like an airplane in that, you got to deal with 3 dimensions. It's actually kind of a tricky and potentially dangerous thing to fly. But yet, if you want to, fly under your own power, the blimp is really the way to go. It's kind of astonishing that people have built hundreds of human-powered airplanes, but maybe ever since 1880 or so, there's been about 10 blimps built. Somebody figured out the reason why, is that the Kremer Prize was indeed, the Kremer Prize prohibited the use of lifting gases. It said, no, it's got to be heavier than air. And that was kind of actually an arbitrary sort of decision. And it led to lots and lots and lots of airplanes being built. And these are all human-powered aircraft that I have actually flown. So this is the Gossamer Condor here, Gossamer Albatross across the channel. This is a thing called a bionic bat, which was another Kremer Prize thing, which you could store energy for 10 minutes on the ground and then had to fly around this course. And whoever did it fastest then won prize, and they had it graduated in that if you broke the previous record by a certain number of, or a certain percentage, then you could win an additional amount of money. So I actually won the Bionic Bat won the second iteration of that prize. First was won by a plane from MIT, and then the MIT folks, well, maybe it was Gunther Rokel. I don't remember who won the third one, and then I piloted the Bat for the fourth stuff. This is another airplane that was actually a contemporary of the Gossamer Condor. It's called the Icarus HPA-1. It's the first successful human-powered airplane in the United States. And I was able to fly that for 30-second flights, but it weighed about 150 or 200 pounds and it had a 40-foot wingspan, so it just was not competitive. This was an extreme case of trying to take advantage of ground effect. And it turned out, no, it just no big advantage there. This was a plane built by folks at MIT. They were the people who actually developed the propeller that we used on the cross-channel albatross. And then this is the Daedalus 88. Well, actually, this is the Nikola Blight Eagle. So this is one of the prototypes for the Daedalus airplane. And you can see here, you know, very streamlined, just super nice materials. But yet, you know, human-powered blimps, if you really want to fly like a flying bicycle, that's the way to go. And it's just unfortunate that the rules said no lifting gases, so everybody has fixated blinders on it and said, well, it has to be an airplane. And done all this work on airplanes and just kind of completely forgotten about the fact that if what you want to do is fly, the blimp is completely valid. So this is the final final slide here, and just some web links. I'll make this available to Lennon so he can distribute it or whatever. But anyway, I've got a couple of web pages. I really don't have much human-powered plane stuff on it. You might notice, in fact, earlier up here, that there's a website, donaldmonroe.com. He was kind of the photographer for both the Condor and Albatross, and he's got many pictures that are really good things. And then just a couple of other sites. If you go to this site, it'll talk about all the different things that AeroVironment has done, the human-powered airplanes, and et cetera. IHPVA is the International Human Powered Vehicle Association. And this link, I don't know if I can get it to, play on my laptop or not. Let's just see. This is, again, for that Japanese competition. People have been building these airplanes, and they'll build them, and then there's a couple of airfields in Japan where people are actually allowed to fly these things. So Japan is very restrictive on personal flight. But a couple of airfields where they're allowed to fly these things. And then they take the planes apart and they take it to the competition and put them up on the pier and fly them out over Lake Biwa. And some people have gotten 20 or 30 kilometers over this lake. One of the rules of that particular competition is you have to land in the water. So to establish a distance, you have to fly out. And the early days, they would fly out. They couldn't fly very far. They could only fly for a minute or two and splash. But they've gotten with planes now, and this is just one of about 10 or so planes that were built a couple of years ago for that competition. They've gotten to the point where these things are pretty high performance. Now, when I first watched this video, I said, oh, okay, well, they're still climbing, all right. And then I see the numbers on the end of the runway. Oh, there must be another runway. Where's this guy going? There must be another runway. There must be. Surely there's another. Oh, he's going to turn here. Yeah, he's just going around the camera here. I think. Where is he going? Oh my gosh. Are those breakers? This is a surf out here. Where's the chase boat? What's this guy doing? And I'll end it here, but this basically just goes on for another couple of minutes as he vanishes off into the mist. And I presume, since this plane actually was entering the competition this year that he must have eventually turned around and come back and landed. But this to me
Actually, they
seems
picked him up off Long Beach.
maybe. Yeah, a friend of mine said, "Oh yeah, he made it all the way to California." But to me, it's terrifying because I mean, this is definitely a high wire act. You know, I mean, even though the art has improved, these planes are still fragile, and they're still very subject to turbulence and stuff like that. And hopefully, he's got a life preserver. But, there he goes. Thank you very much.
So I've asked if you hold off on your questions. We have Paul, who's authored a book on this exact topic, and if you could come up, Paul, and say some things.
Here's the book. Paul McCready and the Dream of Efficient Flight. One day about 8 years ago, I was sitting at home minding my own business, and my editor calls up and he said, Paul, I got some money. Would you like to write a book? And I said, sure, on what? He said, well, what do you got? And what I had was, I'd been interested in planes for a long time. I was in college, I studied mechanical engineering. I was in the Navy chasing submarines for about 5 years. And down in Jacksonville, Florida, we were in P3s. We were out looking for Russian nuclear subs. But on weekends, I didn't get enough flying during the week, apparently. I got to Hurlong Field, which is a private field owned by just for Navy personnel, and you could pick up a light plane, and we'd go out and get a Cessna 150, and I'd fly out over the Okefenokee, just north of the Florida line in Georgia there, looking for alligators, looking for those houses that are on stilts, like the Pirates of the Caribbean down at Disneyland, that kind of stuff. I used to find them. So this was a lot of fun, but it got tiring after a while. The plane was too noisy, it vibrated too much, and I didn't even care for the fuel economy, which is, I don't know, 6.5 gallons per hour. I was flying a 150 in those days, occasionally a Piper Cherokee. So I got out of the Navy and went to journalism school at Berkeley, and I looked up Stuart Brand, who started the Whole Earth catalog, and he was up there in Marin County, and he put me in a hang glider and threw me off a big sand dune, and that was a lot of fun. I liked that was the pure flying experience, but when you got to the bottom, you had to carry the hang glider back up this huge sand dune, and if you didn't get it exactly right, this, I don't know, 25-pound glider all of a sudden weighed 400 pounds. It was driving into the hillside. I convinced Time magazine, I was working for them as a local reporter, Stringer in San Francisco, to let me go out and do a thing about sailplanes. I thought, gee, maybe that's the next thing. Maybe that's the real experience, is flying a sailplane. So we went out to Reno, where there was an airfield out in the sticks, and we went up there, and I tried flying, well, I was a passenger in the sailplane, but that too was fun. But you know, there was a ridge alongside the runway. They'd tow you up, you'd get over the ridge, and you just ride the wave back and forth. You know, the nose always pointed in the same condition, and after an hour, you'd turn around and land. So that was getting nowhere. So when my editor called, I was still trying to figure out, you know, what is the kind of experience. I used to have dreams in those days that I used to go to bed by. For a period of my life, for about a year or so, I always had the same kind of pre-sleep dream, and it would be I would be in something like a snowmobile up in the Arctic woods in the middle of the night, and it'd be covered with a canopy, like in those old jet fighters, a big bubble canopy. I'd have my the lights all pale green in front of me. I'd be listening to Vivaldi, be powered by batteries or fuel cells, and I'd be just going along. All you'd hear is the hiss of the snow, and I'd be out there under the eternal stars. So what I realized, and what I got to talking to my editor about, was that there were some people who just naturally, I was, you know, not the only one. I mean, I imagine just about everybody here in this room has the same sort of feeling as someone who's just interested in the concept of efficiency for almost aesthetic reasons. It wasn't because we wanted to save the planet from global warming, or we were worried about peak oil and we wanted to, you know, save a few bucks. It was just that it seemed right. And I had done a magazine article for New West magazine about that time called Revenge of the Nerds. And this was before the movie. Lorimar actually stole my title. But and I interviewed Steve Wozniak, who was the technical brains behind the original Apple II computer. He was the real technical visionary. Steve Jobs was the man that made it happen, because he was the business genius and kind of the visionary. But the one that knew how to do the circuitry was Wozniak, and he was telling me one night that he was designing a circuit board for the Apple II, and he was laying out the Mylar traces himself. And he said he stayed up all night long because in the first design, he realized that he had 50 feed-throughs in the circuit board where you go under to avoid connecting. So he said that was aesthetically unappealing. He stayed up all night. He got it down to 3. And he said nobody else ever knew about this. It wasn't like it was a technical deficiency. It was just something that he thought was aesthetically appealing to him. So that's when I started to do the book. This is what I wanted to. There was this underlying theme of people who found efficiency aesthetically appealing. So that was kind of the backbone for me of the book. And then, of course, McCready was the obvious person to go to, and all the people around him, like Bryan and many others who, you know, McCready, you know, he built the solar, in addition to the ones that Bryan flew, he built the solar Challenger. He flew across the channel on electrical power. He had a pterodactyl that was battery powered. He had this electrically powered car that went from Darwin to Adelaide in Australia. It was on a race. So he had that feeling too. I mean, even when he was in his 70s, you'd go to a conference with him. We used to go to one up in the Mojave, and he'd be out there during breaks, you know, with little toy airplanes pushing around the thing. So he always loved that aspect of it. Was always really appealing to him. When I got into it further and started to look into the concept of efficiency, I investigated a guy called Bert Heinrich, who was a biologist. He wrote a book which was famous about 15, 20 years ago, Bumblebee Economics. And what he did was see what bumblebees do, and basically what they do is determined by you know, how much energy they expend in order to get get the pollen back to the hive. It's all based on you know, energy efficiency. There was a guy, a biologist I interviewed in Las Vegas, who was telling me about harvester ants and how they never went more than 100 meters from their nest, because it took more energy to get the stuff home, or to get out there, than to bring it home. They weren't making any money beyond a certain point. They were always within a certain radius. And well, Bert Heinrich was a real interesting guy. He started to talk about something. He was a runner, a long-distance runner, and he was a biologist. And he started investigating the mechanics of running, how you needed long legs, light feet, thin bones, and that enabled you to cover a lot of ground. And he was talking about the notion that men, early man, he talked about the bipedal savanna hunting ape of 6 million years ago, was not like the person you see depicted in 2001 Space Odyssey, those creatures at the beginning, those 78-pound proto-humans that are all huddled together in the rocks at night. All 400-pound lions are prowling in the background. He said man was a pretty efficient and pretty determined predator, and there were a couple reasons. He had the bigger brain. He could envision the prey, the successful end of the hunt. Even as the prey disappeared over the next rise, he had hair in his head to protect him from the sun. He had the sweating response, which cooled him off. And in terms of efficiency, man was a super efficient predator. In terms of calories expended per pound of body mass per mile traveled, a man on foot was 50 times more efficient than a mouse, 5 times more efficient than a rabbit, 2 times more efficient than a dog, slightly less efficient than a horse, and half as efficient as a salmon. And the humans had the early humans actually had a large hunting area, 500 to 1,500 square miles, which was comparable to that of 1,500 square miles was almost 40 miles on the side, comparable to that of a wolf pack, which we think is such a wonderful predator. But I see we're coming up on 1 o'clock here. I'll just say what Bert Heinrich said. Those human beings, those proto-human beings from 6 million years ago, when you're out riding your bicycle, one of the most efficient and convenient machines ever invented, the blood of those proto-humans is still running through your veins. The genetic disposition to appreciate efficiency is still going through your veins, and I guess that's the reason you go over the next rise, even though you're pretty tired. So it's 1 o'clock. I guess most of you have to go. I could talk about alpha males and beta males, and why the most creative people, I think, are not the pure alpha males, because they're trying to stay atop of the slippery post. But the ones that really run the world, that make things happen, and I'm not talking about guys with slumped shoulders that can't stand up to themselves or say hello to the presence of a woman. I'm talking about people whose primary goal in life is to do something rather than to establish dominance in any social situation. Those are the people with in whose veins are running the 6 million year old savanna hunting apes. So that's it. Thank you very much.
So yeah, feel free to take off if you want to stick around and ask questions. Feel free to do that. I think we're probably going to be someone waiting in the room. No, they're not. Okay, so we can probably stick around here for a while. Thanks.
Yeah, I put in a professional or a personal promo